We are now going to take bond funds and predict their relative yield to maturity based on characteristics of the bond funds. You should be able to look at a bond fund's characteristics, its prospectus, two bond funds, and tell me which one has the higher expected yield to maturity. Again, what we will be looking at in this case is the four qualities: duration, credit quality, tax exemption, inflation protection. All right, if we have two bonds, bond A, bond B, and each one of these criteria, bond B has higher duration, bond B has lower quality, and neither one of them have anything to do with tax exempt or inflation protection, but bond A has higher duration, lower quality, it should have a higher return because both of those criteria point to that being a higher return. On the exam, I will give you two bond funds, their characteristics, and then ask you which one you would expect to have a higher return. If all the four criteria point to one, you should set to be able to tell me, yes, this one has a higher rate of return. If they don't point in the same way, then you would say you cannot determine it. To look at those, we are going to have 5 bonds that we're going to look like, and this is our bond fund comparison sheet. This is roughly akin, or it is akin to the mutual fund comparison sheet. We have, again, 5 bond funds here. They are all from Vanguard. So these are all Vanguard funds. They also all happen to be index funds, not actively managed. And we have intermediate term Treasury fund, VFITX, first column, intermediate term investment grade. Investment grade signals municipal fund, corporate fund. Intermediate term tax exempt signals tax exempt means it's municipal bonds, high yield corporate, and then a long-term treasury fund. You see those listed. Down the side are their characteristics, and what we are going to do is take this bond fund and compare it to each one and then say something about their yield to maturities. I have listed across the bottom the yield to maturities from a point in time for these funds. They are as expected, but again, if I could give you on the exam this sheet without the yield to maturities listed and asked you, make pairwise comparison and asked you which one should have the higher yield to maturity. All right, let's begin our comparison with the first 2 bond funds. Intermediate Treasury Fund, VFITX, Intermediate Term Investment Grade, VFICX. Again, you can type these funds into your Yahoo Finance ticker symbol and look at what Yahoo Finance says about them. You can easily get their prospectuses as well. You see at the top their objective, but let's go through our 4 criteria, which are listed on our bond fund comparison sheet. Duration. VFITX has a duration of 5.31. Investment grade has 5.45. I would call those about the same, and particularly when we get bond funds with durations of above 4 years, you can say if they're not a year apart, they're about the same. So in this case, even though the investment grade has a bit higher yield or duration, I would not expect that to have much of an impact on yield to maturity. Credit quality. You see the second line list there is type, Treasury and corporate. Treasury means no default risk, highest quality. Corporate, we have default risk. And then we have to go to the credit quality line. And again, credit quality, all the bonds are rated by credit agencies. Go to Yahoo Finance and you can see the proportion of bonds by credit quality. This VFITX has AAA, AA, A, BBB bonds in it. And it actually has a higher proportion towards the upper end, more AAAs. It has a very high quality bond or high credit quality in its fund, but it still has default risk. So we would expect that one to have a higher return relative to the Treasury fund. VFITX, ICX would have a higher return. The investment grade intermediate term fund would have a higher return. Tax-exempt and inflation protection are the same. Credit quality points towards VFICX having a higher yield, and that is what we would expect. All right, let's go to the next two. All right, we're still comparing to our intermediate term Treasury fund. Let's go to the intermediate term tax-exempt fund. Duration is roughly the same again. I would call them the same. Again, they're roughly the same, even though, the duration impact 4.9 is a little bit different for the tax-exempt fund. Type is Treasury for the first one, Municipal. Municipal tells you two things. One, it has default risk. It's a municipal bond. It does not have the full faith of the federal government behind it. It has default risk. All right, so municipal bonds have default risk. Second thing is that they are tax exempt. Municipal funds, again, can be a variety of governmental agencies. They would include city governments, state governments. There are Chicago bonds, there are Illinois bonds. And the government agencies, I'll give you an example. Chicago Water Reclamation District has a bond. So in each one of those would have a different, University of Illinois has bonds. So each one of those would fall under the municipal bond and would have their own credit quality rating. Again, as those credit quality goes down, we would expect the yield to maturity to go down as well. So if we're looking at that, credit quality, the intermediate term tax-exempt grade has lower credit quality, although it's still good in this case, but still lower quality than the Treasury. VFWITX would have the higher return. Tax-exempt status would say exactly the opposite, so it would have the lower return. So that's one of the things that we're looking at here, and it would have the lower return. Inflation protection is the same, and in this case, I would say that you cannot say because the criteria point in different directions. As you can see at the bottom, they have roughly the same yield to maturity. Next comparison, high yield corporate. All right, you already know, high yield. Go in your mind, high yield. Is that good? Well, it's high yield. It also means, in this case, the credit quality is low. High yield bonds are almost always low quality bonds. All right, let's go through this. All right, 5.338 versus high 3.28. I'm getting close to being close to the high yield actually having a bit of difference here, but it's in this case going to be swamped by the type. Credit quality, corporate bond, BB, B, triple B, low B. This is low credit quality, high yield. All right. Actually, we can get higher yields than this is a high yield fund. I could find much more higher yields. Ones that have Illinois state debt, for example. Tax exempt status and inflation protection both are the same. VWEHX in this case would have the higher yield. If you had told me on exam that you could not tell because of lower duration, I would give you credit for that. But in this case, just from a standpoint of risk, the corporate bond fund will have the higher yield. All right, let's go on to the next one. Long-term Treasury fund. All right. You should be able to say in your mind, Treasury fund, no default risk. It's not set a tip. There's no tax-exempt or no tax-exempt status, no inflation protection. All right. It has the higher duration, therefore it's going to have the higher yield. All right. That's what we do. You will be given these different funds and be able to make those comparisons. Also, just by hearing, if you hear high yield fund, low quality. If you're looking at bonds, you should be able to form an opinion about what a bond fund looks like just by those duration, type, credit quality, tax exempt questions.